Welcome to NTD News. I'm Jasmina Davis. Here are today's top stories. President Trump wants tonight's debate to cover foreign affairs. His campaign has accused the debate commission of shielding Joe Biden from talking about his past. Joe Biden says he supports a new rule change that might cut back on interruptions. The debate starts at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. The Director of National Intelligence warned of election disinformation from Iran and Russia. He said the FBI and the DHS are responding to the threat. And a number of Democratic officials have floated the idea of court packing after the judge Amy Coney Barrett was nominated to the Supreme Court. Lawmakers are divided on this issue as we saw Republicans pushing back. We spoke to a law professor for her take on this topic. The CDC is expecting Operation Warp Speed to make a vaccine available within a few weeks or months. And we spoke to an expert about the pitfalls of extended lockdowns in some states. The Senate Judiciary Committee voted this morning to advance Judge Amy Coney Barrett's Supreme Court nomination to full Senate floor. This is despite a decision by Senate Democrats to boycott the vote. Here's the breaking news. The Republican-controlled committee voted 12-0 to recommend Barrett for a full Senate vote. No Democrats were present. Committee rules require 12 members to be present to bring a matter to a floor vote, and 2 people from the minority party need to be present. Republicans can meet the first requirement if every Republican senator is present, but they also need the attendance of at least 2 Democrats. Instead of attending the markup, Senate Democrats said they will hold press conferences. With buzz about Democratic officials aiming to expand the Supreme Court, Republican senators are pushing back, introducing legislation to keep 9. We speak with a law professor for more analysis on the situation.
Republican senators doubled down on their efforts to prevent court packing.
I can't think of a more destabilizing event for America than change the number of judges on the Supreme Court every election cycle.
A year and a half ago, Senator Marco Rubio first introduced the constitutional amendment to limit the Supreme Court to 9 justices. He was joined in a press conference by a group of others who want to also prevent senators from making changes to the number. Graham went on to say that by changing the number of justices, it would become a winner-take-all for the court.
The traditional debate has been who fills vacancies, liberal, conservative. It's never been about how many will you have, and you'll eventually destroy the judiciary as we know it.
Senator Ben Sasse said that at a time when Americans were losing faith in the nation's institutions, changing the structure of the Supreme Court would only add to the instability. He said the idea of expanding the court and its impact could have long-lasting effects and shouldn't be interpreted just through the lens of this moment and this election. We spoke to Professor Nora Deem-Leitner from the Washington and Lee University School of Law to get her take on the situation. Professor Deem-Leitner said the likelihood of a constitutional amendment getting passed is very unlikely. This is because it would need a majority vote to allow it to pass. Given the current divide in the country, she said it would be even more difficult. In addition, she said passing legislation to change the number of justices would potentially only last until the power in Congress shifted to the other side.
A past Congress can find a future Congress. I mean, this otherwise, this would happen all the time, and we would still be run by legislation that was passed in the 1850s.
Professor Deem-Leitner says a large part of the reason for rejecting the idea of court packing is because people believe the number 9 is in the Constitution. This long-standing tradition was established by Congress in 1896. According to her, there is also controversy because it looks like a political ploy to shift the court to move to a more progressive, democratic line of decision-making. She went on to say that filling Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat close to an election made this an illegitimate process.
It's an illegitimate seat, and so that means if one seat is illegitimate, you can add 1, maybe 2 seats.
Deem-Leitner said regaining trust in institutions such as the judicial branch is a complex solution that will only be seen with time. Christina Kim, NTD News.
And Biden has just said if elected, he would form a commission to evaluate the Supreme Court. He did not give a clear position on court packing. He did say the evaluation wasn't about court packing and that there are a number of other things the commission would evaluate to reform the court system. President Trump commenting on the upcoming presidential debate. He said they are supposed to be talking about foreign affairs, referring to recent allegations about Hunter Biden that implicate his father, Joe Biden.
President Trump speaking to reporters on the South Lawn of the White House. He says the introduction of the rule to mute speakers during the presidential debate is very unfair. He had another complaint as well.
Well, I think the mute is very unfair. And I think it's very bad that they're not talking about foreign affairs.
Scandalous revelations about Hunter Biden over the last week are the subject of much controversy among social media users. Both Facebook and Twitter have suppressed the story on their platforms. The revelations relate to Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings, among other things. Trump's campaign manager suggested the Commission on Presidential Debates is attempting to suppress this story from coming to light during the debate. Boarding Marine Force One, the president departed to a campaign rally in North Carolina. Arriving in Gastonia, President Trump weighed in on former President Barack Obama, saying Obama had underestimated him as he recalled his victory over Hillary Clinton. Obama spoke on behalf of Democrat Joe Biden at a drive-in rally in Philadelphia Wednesday. President Trump blasted the mainstream media, saying the incessant negative coverage of the virus was giving people little to hope for. He reiterated his promise to have 100 million vaccine doses by the end of the year.
Ahead of last night's rally in North Carolina, some told us why they are passionate in their support for the president. They said despite the criticism he faces, Trump continues to keep moving ahead. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has more from North Carolina.
Tens of thousands flowed into the airport in this small town in North Carolina. Crowds piled up for hours to see the president.
It's really awesome to be around so much enthusiasm. So many thousands of people. I think, 20 to 30,000 people are expected tonight. So it's just cool to be around that type of energy.
Thanks for coming to Gastonia.
And there were more that couldn't fit inside. They lined the streets with hopes that they could squeeze in. While waiting, some told us they support the president because he's kept his word.
He signed a pact for life before he was elected last time. And not only did he keep all the pacts that he signed, he went above and beyond. He's done so much more than he promised, and he's done so much more than any president in my lifetime, at least, that I've been able to see.
When it comes to his foreign policy, he's done an amazing job brokering deals in Israel.
And hoping Trump is reelected this year, supporters urged him to keep moving ahead with his plans.
I'd just like to tell him thank you for all the hard work he's been doing for us. He works tirelessly for us, and I'd just like to thank him for that, and also just encourage him to follow through on his promise to uphold the sanctity of life in this nation.
I just say thank you very much. I can't believe your sacrifice that you've made for us for the past 4 years. I know it's been so difficult with so many people working against you, but you just keep going no matter what they say or do to you.
In 2016, Trump won North Carolina by about 3% more popular votes than Hillary Clinton. Reporting from Gastonia, North Carolina, Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
A federal court just ruled on October 20th that North Carolina would be given 9 extra days to count mail-in ballots. According to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, North Carolina will have an extra 6 days on top of their previous 3-day extension. Ballots cast by mail must still be postmarked on or before Election Day, but as long as they are received by November 12th, they can be counted. Appeals courts have blocked mail-in ballot deadline extensions in Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The second and final presidential debate is tonight. If you watched the first one, you'll remember there was a lot of interrupting going on. But there's a new mic muting change for tonight's debate. Democratic nominee Joe Biden is supporting the rule change.
Democratic hopeful Joe Biden says muting microphones for the final debate is a good idea. Biden told Wisconsin station WISN 12 News he thinks there should be more limitations to prevent interruptions. He said moderator Chris Wallace interrupted them 148 times during the first debate. On Monday, the debate commission announced the change. Each candidate's mic will be muted for 2 minutes. It gives them uninterrupted time to respond to the 6 debate topics. 15 minutes of open discussion will follow any muting. Responding to accusations that the commission is trying to protect Biden from the sensitive topic of foreign policy, the Biden campaign said it was up to the moderator to choose the topics. The debate is scheduled to start at 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
The FBI and DHS are responding to attempts by foreign countries to influence the election. Spoof emails and video content has been sent to registered voters containing false information.
The Trump administration's National Intelligence Director warned of an election security breach by foreign adversaries.
First, we have confirmed that some voter registration information has been obtained by Iran and separately by Russia.
During a rare press conference on election security, John Ratcliffe said the intelligence community was prepared for the possibility of actions by those hostile to democracy.
We have already seen Iran sending spoofed emails designed to intimidate voters, incite social unrest, and damage President Trump.
Ratcliffe said the intent is to cause confusion, sow chaos, and undermine confidence in American democracy. As well as spoofed emails, there is a video created by Iran that claims individuals could cast fraudulent ballots from overseas. Ratcliffe denied these claims. Ratcliffe noted the FBI and DHS acted swiftly and are on top of this threat. He said the same actions have not been seen from Russia, but he did say Russia has obtained some voter information just as they did in 2016. Ratcliffe urged recipients of such materials not to be alarmed and not to spread them. He said that President Trump had instructed him to keep the public informed as appropriate.
American universities reported $6.5 billion in previously undisclosed foreign gifts and contracts. This comes after the Department of Education launched 12 investigations into universities.
On October 20th, U.S. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos put out a report that showed American universities previously failed to disclose $6.5 billion in foreign gifts and contracts. These come from countries including China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. Section 117 of the Higher Education Act requires nearly all colleges and universities to report twice a year foreign gifts and contracts of $250,000 or more. For years, many have failed to do so. Others have severely underreported the income. For example, Yale University failed to report any foreign gifts and contracts for 4 years. Case Western University did not report for 12 years. As the Department of Education launched 12 investigations, many universities have been catching up and are retroactively providing figures. Some of these investigations are still ongoing. According to Secretary DeVos, the threat of improper foreign influence in higher education is real, and it is important that the American people have transparency in foreign fundings into our universities. Between 2014 and 2020, universities reportedly got more than $19.6 billion in foreign gifts and contracts. Almost $1.5 billion of that is from China, nearly $3.1 billion from Qatar, and more than $1.1 billion from Saudi Arabia. This is according to historical data and figures posted by the Department of Education and their new online reporting portal. Noncompliance is widespread. Almost 70% of American schools that received more than $250,000 from the Chinese Education Ministry, Hanban, did not properly report that information to the Department of Education. According to the report, Saudi Arabia's Prince Al-Walid bin Talal donated a large sum to Georgetown University. This transaction encouraged the Saudis to, quote, push a particularly ideology-driven narrative in Middle East-related curriculum. While it isn't illegal for universities to accept gifts and funds from foreign countries, the schools must report these transactions. The Department of Education created an online reporting portal that schools were ordered to use beginning July 31st. According to them, the portal saw schools disclose significantly more information. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Many states are using lockdowns as a way to respond to the CCP virus, and some governors are continuing to use these measures 7 months after the initial outbreak. Our reporter Kevin Hogan spoke with an expert to learn more about the economic impact and legality of the extended restrictions.
7 months after the initial outbreak of the CCP virus, governors are still using executive powers to control the spread. Initially, states justified the lockdowns in efforts to flatten the curve and relieve burdened hospitals. But now, researcher Joel Griffith at the Heritage Foundation cites economic disparities and court rulings as evidence they've gone too far.
There are many examples of governors going to extremes and implementing draconian shutdown measures. And it's not just that some of these measures are extreme. In some instances, these measures have actually been flat out unconstitutional.
For example, on October 2nd, the Michigan Supreme Court ruled Governor Whitmer's extension of the state of emergency past April 30th without legislative approval unconstitutional. Whitmer signed over 180 executive orders since mid-March, closing restaurants, restricting schools and businesses, and barring some medical practices. Patients reportedly suffered from the lack of necessary care. Some endured the ravages of the tissue disease gangrene, and others went through excruciating pain without being able to access needed medication. Griffith suggests politicians make decisions about reopening based on facts and not what's hyped in the media. For example, the Associated Press reported South Dakota hospitals are struggling with a surge in cases. But we contacted Avera Health, which services the area, and found that statewide, over a third of the staffed hospital beds are still available.
We have to look beyond the headlines, especially policymakers, when they're determining to what extent to reopen, and look at hard data. And I think Governor DeSantis has been exemplary in that, in making decisions based on data and doing so in a way that has minimized the economic damage across much of Florida, for instance.
On September 25th, DeSantis rolled back restrictions on Florida restaurants and businesses. And the hospitals in the former hotspot Miami-Dade County did not experience a significant reduction in available beds in the weeks that followed DeSantis' move.
And we've seen really positive results. I mentioned Georgia and Florida. We see the unemployment rate in some of these metro areas like Atlanta, Miami, Dallas, that had actually come down dramatically to roughly 6%. But meanwhile, we see other metro areas that are living with these shutdown orders, and it's a very different picture.
Cities with more severe lockdown measures have higher unemployment rates. Conversely, states with limited COVID shutdowns like Missouri and Utah are projected to take much less of a hit to their second quarter GDP than states like New York and Michigan. Utah's economy is actually expected to expand by over 3%. Kevin Hogan, NTD News, New York.
Coming up, a lawmaker condemns an alleged attack on an 85-year-old woman. They blame the attack on a New York law that forces judges to release some suspects without cash bail or pre-trial detention. Workers show how ballots are processed in America's 5th largest voting jurisdiction. The voting center is seeing record returns on early voting ballots. The Iowa Supreme Court has upheld a Republican-backed voting law. It prevents election officials from fixing errors in absentee ballot applications. Iowa's deadline to apply for absentee ballots is Saturday. Dissenting justices said the ruling will likely cause thousands of voters to not get their ballots in time. But the majority agreed with Republicans that the law helps protect election integrity. It makes sure voters verify their own identities. They noted that about 13,000 absentee ballot requests hadn't been fulfilled yet, saying that's an extremely low number. Election auditors will no longer be able to use the voter registration database to fill in blanks on voter applications. Instead, they will have to send them back to applicants for them to fill out or contact the voter directly. And voters in Alabama will not be able to cast ballots from their cars in November. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected a lower court ruling that permitted curbside voting. It would have allowed voters vulnerable to the virus or with impaired mobility to hand their ballots to election workers outside polling places. The court's 5-member conservative majority permanently banned the ruling. The court's 3 remaining liberal justices voted against the suspension. They said curbside voting respects everyone's rights to vote safely and in an orderly way, noting that 28 states allow it. The lawsuit was a challenge to Alabama's Secretary of State. He said voting outside polling places opens the door to fraud. This year's election is unprecedented for voters in America, with millions of people choosing to vote by mail. Others, however, are taking that extra step to ensure their vote is counted.
Mail-in voting is breaking records as the presidential election approaches. Many states are creating temporary mail-in ballot systems due to the CCP virus pandemic. The U.S. Election Project says nearly 30 million mail-in ballots have been cast as of Wednesday. A voter in Orlando, Florida, is wary.
Go to the polls. I don't trust the mail-in voting whatsoever. I just saw in the news the other night they found a whole bunch of ballots in a garbage can. You know, they tried the mail-in voting, and I know 2 other states, early voting, you know, that they had, and it was nothing but a fiasco.
A recent investigation by the FBI reveals that in one Pennsylvania county, ballots were opened immediately upon arrival, which violates the law. Amid these controversies, a voter from St. Louis says she wants to make sure her vote counts.
People are interfering with the way the post office is working right now, and I think that scares some people. That's why I'm voting here in person.
According to Ballotpedia, 10 states, including California, D.C., and New Jersey, are automatically sending ballots to voters this year. A citizen data poll of 30,000 voters shows 35% plan to vote by mail. Of those, 61% identify as Democrats, while 31% are Republicans.
As millions of Americans vote early in this year's presidential election, workers at voting centers like one in Orange County in Santa Ana, California, are busy opening and processing ballots.
Millions of Americans are voting early in this year's presidential election. Once they vote either by mail or through a drop-off site, their ballots end up at voting centers like this one in Orange County in Santa Ana, California, where workers are busy opening and processing them through.
What you're seeing here is this is a large part of the manual operation for flattening ballots and preparation for scanning them. This is after they've been opened.
That's Neil Kelly, the elections chief for Orange County.
We mailed out on October the 5th to 1.7 million voters, so voting has been going on for several weeks now, and historic returns to date. We started off a few days after the mailing receiving tens of thousands of ballots, and it was actually 400% over 4 years ago.
Kelly explains what happens once you mail or drop off your ballot.
So what you're seeing here are the ballots that are coming in from mail or drop boxes. And these ballots, the first stop they make is this device, which captures the signature of the voter, and then we make the comparison to the voter's signature on file, and then we open the ballot if it's eligible.
The ballots then go into individual slots where they are sorted by precincts, and workers then open the ballots and flatten them before they are scanned and processed. And for those who want to vote in person in Orange County, the 5th largest voting jurisdiction in the U.S., Kelly says they'll be welcomed with hand sanitizers, people in full PPE, and disposable pens to use. Voters will also use a device that is not connected to a network or the internet, which makes it unhackable, according to Kelly. The voters will put their ballots into drop boxes in the machines, and the ballots are later collected by election workers and are taken to a secure location where they are counted via a central tally system.
We do everything but tally the votes, and I can't do that until election night. So we hold the data in suspense, and it's in multiple databases, and then we fuse it all together on election night to produce the results. I cannot know the results, and I can't produce the results until election night.
Kelly said although the number of returns is still much higher than what he saw in 2016, it is slowing a bit. Nonetheless, Kelly, who has managed other presidential elections, said he's never seen this much enthusiasm before.
A lawmaker and police reps blame New York's controversial bail reform law for the attempted assault of an 85-year-old woman. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on what happened, and viewers are advised that the crimes covering in the following story are of a graphic nature.
25-year-old Mario Pope, arrested last week, is accused of attempting to sexually assault an 85-year-old woman in a Brooklyn apartment building. That's according to the NYPD, which says Pope was arrested and is facing several charges. A Republican congressional candidate, together with police reps, are pinning the incident on the state's bail reform law, a law that forces judges to release suspects who've committed certain crimes without cash bail.
The group that is with me today, they stood with me just a couple of blocks away from here after a woman was almost raped in the subway station. And here we are today because an 85-year-old woman in this building was almost raped as well.
Maliotakis says both of these attacks were carried out by people released without bail. So we're in Brooklyn, and behind me is the building where Pope allegedly attacked the 85-year-old woman in a laundry room. Now, media reports say that Pope was arrested and released without bail in a separate incident in April, and a detectives union president told us that at this time he should still have been in jail or monitored.
So this individual should not have been on the street to victimize the people of this city. And he graduated up to a crime of an attempted rape now that victimized an old woman. And that should not have happened. And the reason it happened is because our government and our city officials have failed us, and they've tied the hands of the police.
According to the state's criminal court database, Pope was hit with multiple assault and harassment charges when he was first arrested in April, about 5 months ago, then released and only ordered to attend his next court hearing. This is a requirement under New York's bail reform. People charged with crimes like shoplifting and some types of assault are to be released under the law. Changes were made to the law earlier this year, one of which lets judges set cash bail if the suspect is a repeat offender. Miguel Moreno, NTD News, New York.
Coming up, a firm where Hunter Biden served as director has been investigating in and acquiring sensitive technologies of interest to the Chinese regime. And the first United Nations big data complex is set to be built in China. The officials who signed agreements on behalf of China and the UN were both Chinese. Find out more on what the database will cover when we return. The Trump administration approved the sale of advanced weaponry to Taiwan. It includes missiles made by Boeing. The package is worth just over $1 billion. It contains over 130 precision land attack missiles, associated equipment, and training. The State Department said it's to allow Taiwan to improve its defense capabilities and maintain political stability. Taiwan has thanked the U.S. for its support as it faces escalating rhetoric of war from the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP strongly objects to any U.S. arms sales to the island. Now we take a look at BHR Partners, a firm largely backed by the Chinese state in which Hunter Biden served as a director. It has a history of investing in and acquiring sensitive technologies of interest to the Chinese regime. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more on the story.
BHR Partners, a private investment fund, has been in the news a lot lately. This as Hunter Biden's business dealings in China and Ukraine have come under close scrutiny as his father runs for the presidential office. Some of the dealings are detailed in emails recently obtained by the New York Post and a Senate report. But many have already been reported by the media in the past.
Investigation this morning into Joe Biden's son Hunter and questions about money he made from foreign business dealings while his father was vice president.
And Hunter's tithe with BHR is one of them. So what exactly is this company and what's Hunter's role in it? Hunter remained a director of BHR until late last year. His lawyer said he didn't receive compensation for the position. A Financial Times report shows that BHR listed an investment firm as a shareholder that owned 30% of the fund. Other shareholders of the firm include major Chinese state-owned banks and local governments. Hunter bought a 10% stake of the fund through a company he owns at the price of $420,000. BHR Partners have been found to invest in and acquire sensitive technologies to the interest of the Chinese regime. One example is that in September 2015, BHR jointly acquired American automotive company Henniges. BHR's joint acquirer is a subsidiary of China's defense company Aviation Industry Corporation of China, or AVIC. AVIC holds 51% of the automotive company and BHR the remaining 49%. AVIC is on the Pentagon list of companies that are controlled by the Chinese military. It's a major military contractor for the People's Liberation Army. It has been accused of stealing technologies from U.S. stealth fighters and drones and using them on Chinese weapons. AVIC's subsidiary has also been sanctioned by the U.S. government for helping Iran develop missiles. The acquired Henniges is a leading producer of anti-vibration components, which is a dual-use technology that can be applied for military use. CFIUS, the U.S. agency responsible for reviewing foreign acquisitions involving sensitive technology, approved the deal in 2015. According to a Chinese investment research firm, BHR Partners has invested in state-owned China General Nuclear Power Corporation, or CGN. The Chinese state-owned company has previously had its staff jailed in America for illegally enlisting U.S. nuclear experts to help China develop its nuclear programs. CGN is also listed by the Pentagon as either owned or controlled by the Chinese military. BHR has also invested in Chinese facial recognition and artificial intelligence company MegaV Technology. The Chinese company was blacklisted by the U.S. in October last year for helping the Chinese regime's surveillance of Uyghur populations in Xinjiang, where an estimated 1 million Uyghurs are being detained in internment camps. The U.S. on Wednesday designated 6 more Chinese media companies as foreign missions, bringing the total number to 15. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the move was aimed at pushing back against the propaganda from the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. The outlets can still publish in the U.S. and decide on the content themselves, but Pompeo said consumers will be able to differentiate between news written by a free press and propaganda distributed by the Chinese Communist Party itself. Now we turn to the issue of live organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience in China. The topic came up at the press briefing to combat trafficking on October 16th. A reporter asked if the U.S. will take action to end the 21 years of persecution against the spiritual discipline Falun Gong in China. That's after the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, both expressed concern for the cause. U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Robert Destro responded, saying he couldn't think of a more horrific human rights abuse than stealing someone's liver. An ambassador at large to monitor and combat trafficking in persons, John Richmond, said the removal of organs is one of the forms of exploitation under the Palermo Protocol, the UN protocol against trafficking in persons. The Palermo Protocols are to prevent, suppress, and punish human traffickers. It's against transnational organized crime, meaning it extends across national borders. Both Destro and Richmond said they will continue to gather relevant information and asked for anyone who has information to step forward. Allegations against the Chinese regime conducting forced live organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience first appeared in 2006. Such prisoners include Falun Gong, Uyghur Muslims, and other political prisoners. The report relies on witnesses who claim first-hand knowledge and investigations by the authors, Canadian MP David Kilgore and human rights lawyer David Mattis. Since then, there's been an influx of reports pointing to the atrocities. An international tribunal in London concluded among the more than 1.5 million detainees in Chinese prisons, some are killed for their organs. Research Center China Organ Harvest says China outperforms the rest of the world in organ transplants. This despite having few donations. They cite a decade of research pointing to the systematic killing of prisoners of conscience for their organs.
The first United Nations Big Data Complex is set to be built in China. It'll provide detailed mapping of everything from topography and infrastructure to human behavior across time zones and around the globe. The officials signing the agreement on behalf of China and the UN were both Chinese.
The United Nations Secretariat in New York has partnered with Beijing to set up joint data hubs. They'll reportedly be based in China. This as the U.S. works to limit data flow to Beijing. According to Hudson Institute researcher Claudia Rosette, plans include a research center for crunching data from UN member states, as well as a geospatial center to further practice China's power on satellite surveillance. The UN's website explains that geospatial information details the whens, wheres, and whys of our world, including all social, economic, and environmental activity. Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping promised the big data complex would allow for in-depth mapping of everything from topography and infrastructure to human behavior across time and around the globe. The plan started last year. In June 2019, the head of China's National Bureau of Statistics and the UN Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs signed a memorandum of understanding in Shanghai. It's titled the United Nations National Bureau of Statistics Institute of Big Data. Notably, this particular UN department has been run by China since 2007. So the officials who signed the memorandum on behalf of China and the UN were both Chinese. In September, the department's head announced that the Global Geospatial Knowledge and Innovation Center is in its final stage of approval. Rosette says the Chinese regime has long been deploying advanced tech to control its own people. She adds that the UN badge of legitimacy would make it easier for Beijing to project its techno-tyranny around the world.
Up next, streaming video service Quibi is to end operations after just 6 months. The service blames the failure on timing and the dominance of rival streaming services. And another massive opioid settlement. An American drug maker will pay out big. More on that after the break. Electric car maker Tesla on Wednesday reported a profit for its 5th quarter in a row. It posted a record revenue of $8.8 billion. The electric car maker's earnings were boosted by an uptick of vehicle deliveries in the 3rd quarter, as well as by sales of environmental credits to other automakers. Tesla also affirmed its target to deliver 500,000 vehicles this year. The company has enjoyed a meteoric rise under its outspoken and sometimes controversial chief executive Elon Musk. It has defied the downward trend of the wider auto industry in 2020 with steady sales and profitable quarters, sending shares up around 400% this year. Tesla's market capitalization at $394.5 billion is the largest among all automakers in the world. That's despite the company trailing its rivals in sales, revenue, and profit. Streaming service Quibi said it intends to wind down its operations and start a process to sell its assets just 6 months after its launch. The announcement made on Wednesday also highlights the dominance of streaming giants like Netflix and Amazon's Prime. Smaller services find it difficult to compete with their rivals' vast libraries of shows. In a letter to employees, top executives blame the failure either on the idea itself not being strong enough as a standalone service or the timing of their launch, which coincided with the pandemic. It was backed by $1.8 billion from Hollywood studios and other investors. China's largest mobile payment company, Ant Group, has cleared its last regulatory hurdle. It's set to launch a $35 billion initial public offering. That would make it the world's largest public listing. If successful, it would beat the last IPO record held by Saudi Aramco at $29.4 billion. The Chinese fintech company got the go-ahead from the country's top securities watchdog to list in Shanghai. It's planning to list simultaneously on both the Hong Kong market and the STAR market in Shanghai. It would be the first IPO to do so. Ant Group reported operating income of nearly $18 billion in the first 9 months of the year. That's up nearly 43% compared to last year. If the IPO is successful, it would lift Hong Kong to the 2nd spot in the Global Stock Exchange League, behind only NASDAQ. Ant Group plans to set the price by October 27th for its Shanghai offering. And coming up, Turkish police seized nearly 500 pounds of cocaine on a ship from Brazil. The drug was hidden in a container of packages marked blank paper. And with the pandemic hitting restaurants and tourist sites, the owner of a Michelin-Starred restaurant in Hungary comes up with socially distant dining perfection. Find out more after the break. Germany's health minister has tested positive for the CCP virus. The health ministry said that he has placed himself in home quarantine.
The 40-year-old minister had been suffering from cold-like symptoms. A government spokesman said he attended a cabinet meeting earlier on Wednesday, and people he had been in contact with are being informed. Germany's infection rates are lower than in much of Europe, but they've been accelerating. They hit a daily record of almost 8,000 on Saturday. Germany has less than 10,000 virus-related deaths so far and almost 400,000 confirmed cases. Minister Spahn urged Germans to stick to social distancing rules to keep the infection rate low, and that they now face a, quote, test of character to contain the surge.
Turkey is an important transit country between Europe and the Middle East. It's also on the drug trafficking route to supply the West with drugs from South America. NTD UK's Neil Woodrow will bring us more news from Europe.
Thanks. Welcome to the UK newsroom with UK and European news. Turkish authorities seized almost 500 pounds of cocaine at a ship arriving at a southern coastal port from Brazil. Narcotics police in the province of Mersin found the drug haul hidden in a container as blocks labelled as blank paper. 2 suspects have been detained. Turkey is on the so-called Balkan route of drug trafficking, which is used to supply the West with drugs from Asia and the Middle East. Ankara says drug trafficking is one of the main sources of finance for terrorist groups. A 2016 report said cocaine was Europe's most commonly used illicit stimulant drug. Dozens of migrants arrived by dinghy at a beach popular with tourists in Spain's Atlantic island of Gran Canaria. Migrants are attended by Red Cross volunteers and police officers upon their arrival. On Tuesday, nearly 400 migrants arrived in Gran Canaria, including this group. Local media reports before them, some 1,200 migrants landed on the island in recent weeks. Gran Canaria is one of the main islands in the Canary Islands. Spain's Interior Ministry data shows, although seaborne migration to Spain is down, arrivals to the Canary Islands have surged 5 times compared to last year. Local authorities are feeling the strain, struggling with the logistics of accommodating increasing arrivals. German police say they are investigating an attack that caused extensive damage on Berlin's Museum Island.
Museum officials and police say unknown suspects had splashed an oily liquid around the museum during the opening hours on October the 3rd.
Based on current information, close to 63 objects are affected by different materials and of different presentations.
Police believe the objects were chosen at random and the suspect acted alone, but it isn't easy to find clues through security cameras.
The problem is that the liquid that was applied is colourless.
Berlin's Museum Island, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the capital's most famous sites, houses large collections of art and cultural history from Europe and the Mediterranean region. Some local media are describing the incident as one of Germany's most serious acts on artworks in decades.
The pandemic has left art galleries in the UK on the brink of collapse without government help.
The collection at the gallery has seen a 90% fall in visitors and has deferred exhibitions to next year.
So financially, it doesn't make sense to do blockbuster shows at the moment.
In order to survive, some galleries have had to sell their collections.
The concept of selling your collection in order to survive is tragic and really should not happen.
Bray says he would do everything he can to avoid it.
But it's not the way forwards, and the fact that they end up in private hands just completely undermines the concept of the museum that is there for public, welfare.
Thankfully, some help is on the way. The British government is providing a $2 billion cultural recovery fund. The Arts Council of England is helping to administer the fund.
Top English soccer club Manchester United slumped to a net loss of $30.3 million in the last financial year. Controlled by American Glazer family since 2005, United had an $18.9 million profit 1 year earlier. They've made a mixed start to the new English Premier League season on the pitch, placing 15th out of 20. Last week, they put forward plans with Liverpool for radical changes to the English game structure and finances. The other Premier League clubs rejected the proposal. A large earthquake in Iceland in the North Atlantic briefly disrupted an interview between a columnist and Iceland's Prime Minister. Washington Post Foreign Affairs columnist David Ignatius was talking with Katrin Jakobsdottir on Tuesday when the event happened.
Oh my God, there's an earthquake. Sorry, there was an earthquake right now. Wow.
The Prime Minister confirmed she was perfectly fine and that the house is still strong. The sparsely populated 40,000 square mile island has had 28 earthquakes in the last year. This one was magnitude 5.5 and a depth of 6 miles. With the pandemic hitting both dining and tourism, a Michelin-Starred restaurant in Hungary comes up with a win-win idea.
Costas Restaurant is staging a skyline dining event on the Budapest Eye Ferris wheel.
Now that there are not many people either on the wheel or in the restaurant because there are no tourists, the opportunity arose that we could do this idea.
Enjoying the city's views while having fine food in a safe separate cabin, this tourist loves the experience.
I think it's important to be safe, but I think having fun is essential to your life as well.
Some diners are locals looking for a rare escape from the constraint of the pandemic.
We used to go to restaurants quite often. We've been to 2 Michelin-Star ones, but because of COVID we stopped going. So this is the only chance for us now because here we are really separated.
Tickets for the novel dining experience cost $150 each for a 4-course meal and sold out within days. The owner of the Costas restaurant plans to repeat the event next spring.
That's us for now. Thanks for watching. Back to New York.
One of Australia's iconic animal species struggles to survive after bushfires killed 10% of their population. They also face threats from land development and disease. A U.S. astronaut and 2 Russian cosmonauts landed by parachute in Kazakhstan on Thursday morning. They were carried by a Russian spacecraft. The capsule left the International Space Station a few hours earlier, carrying 3 people safely back to Earth. NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy and his 2 Russian colleagues landed in their spacecraft on the steppe of southeastern Kazakhstan. Cassidy spent almost 380 days in space. That's the 5th highest among U.S. astronauts. Since the Space Shuttle program ended in 2011, NASA has relied on Russia to take its astronauts to the space station. 3 crew members, including 1 American, remain on board the ISS. The mission is the last scheduled Russian flight carrying a U.S. crew member. From disease to bushfires, these destructive forces could make New South Wales' symbolic animal extinct by 2050.
In Australia's most populous state, New South Wales, there is the plight to save koalas. Recent fires have ravaged their habitat, but even before the fires, a government report said the species could be extinct by 2050. At her home in the western suburbs of Sydney, Tracy is looking after a rescued koala family after urban development encroached their habitat.
We're losing koalas from with these new developments. There's more vehicles in these areas, which is koala core habitat. And then having people moving into these new developments, they also have dogs. So we're having an increase of dog attacks.
The Wildlife Information Rescue and Education Service volunteer is feeding the 2 young joeys eucalyptus leaves to get them back to a healthy weight. They were found underweight and in poor health. A mainstay of Australian cultural identity, koalas were thrust into the centre of the national conversation after the country's worst summer of bushfires in a generation killed or displaced more than 35,000 of the marsupials across the country. That's 10% of the population. Kelly Lee is the head of science for wildlife, a not-for-profit conservation organisation.
It's probably
Lee's team is using advanced methods to track koala movements and monitor populations in bushfire-affected areas. They also have a dog trained to follow the scent of koala droppings. Koala conservationists are focused more than ever on cities as population growth in places like Sydney drives demand to clear forests and make way for homes. This rescue, named Ernie, lost his eye to another threat to the species, chlamydia. It's pervasive in koala populations and just one of the many forces putting their survival at risk.
And that's all for now. Catch us again at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Jasmina Davis.